Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February 13th edition of Gateway API. We have an agenda that's mostly Rob and me, so if anybody has anything that they want to bring up, please do go ahead and jump on our Google Doc and add it. As a reminder, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which effectively boils down to be nice. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we'll get through the agenda here. Okay. All right. First thing up on the list from Dave.
I should say I'm the one that added this, but it is Dave's issue.
Oh, okay.
Um,
We'll talk about cluster local gateways, which is a pull request right now. GEP 1651. Take it away, Rob.
yeah, I left a comment at the bottom here, but I'm really just trying to figure out how this fits into the broader picture here, because I know there's kind of this longer term, bigger picture discussion of, hey, could we have like a gateway class cluster IP or something like that was maybe even implemented by data planes like kubeproxy in the future. I don't know. Like there's that idea of gateway kind of taking on the service routing capabilities that currently live on service. And then there's also where I think this is really coming from is the idea of trying to map. There's a huge number of implementations today that by default will take a gateway, and when they see a gateway, they're going to turn around and create a service type load balance, usually type load balancer, and a deployment behind it that would be some kind of gateway implementation. And this feels like a tiny subset of that, right? Like it seems like we're trying to find a generic way to represent, I want that service that you're creating to be cluster IP and not not a load balancer. Is that, am I understanding this correctly before I go too much further?
Can you hear me? I guess
Yeah.
I would describe the problem first before we talk about the potential solution. So the problem we have, and I guess for those that don't know, I'm kind of like representing Knative here. People create Knative services, which kind of like abstract a lot of the underlying details. And one of the things people want to create is like a service that is only accessible on a cluster. Like, so it's kind of like a private, so it's not by default exposed to a public like ingress. And so that's sort of the problem. So the question is like, hey, how can you do this right now with the Gateway API, but in a portable way? I would say it doesn't currently exist. So this is sort of the gap that's trying to address that. So like, how can I create gateways that really only come back with a status address that's only accessible on the current cluster? Whether that's implemented with like a Kubernetes service, which is kind of what it lends itself to, sure. But I would say it doesn't necessarily like imply that, but even though yeah, kind of does.
I think what you're the way you phrase that, I feel like it is almost entirely tied to a service of type cluster IP, because like, I'm thinking of cloud load balancers naturally, and our internal load balancers would not be limited to a single cluster necessarily. So that, but maybe there are other potential means of implementation that I'm missing. But yeah.
It might not be the most helpful anecdote, but to give some, I guess I have some context. A very early version of Kong's ingress controller actually did this with Gateway. And it did use service type, but it specifically added, service type load balancer, but it specifically added the cluster IP for administrative traffic. That is, we would have the control planes and that may actually be multiple, talking to the gateway using the cluster IP, but all other traffic would be through the load balancer for the actual like application traffic. We ultimately threw that away because there was not really much support in the community at that time. It's probably like a year or more ago for having that, for differentiating traffic, administrative traffic versus application traffic. But I can see the use case. We just got off of it because we didn't want to try to push through it at the time. So
Yeah,
I guess I should rephrase. Sorry. I see the use case particularly when you're talking about different kinds of traffic to the gateway. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, the way to think about it too, right? Where hey, if I'm running a cluster and I'm running Kenya, I would want to expose, for example, my front end services to the public internet. But for example, my microservices would be private, but I still want to potentially benefit from all the L7 features to do like canary rollout, traffic splitting, and things like that.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Can I ask a simple question? Pretty new to this.
Of course.
What I'm seeing that was as I'm hearing all these things. So it depends upon what kind of traffic, whether traffic is for application-based traffic or it's admin traffic. So if we have, in that case, if you think that the gateway is a load balancer for the traffic, then that should be that means one particular load balancer or the local gateway we're talking about should be for a particular app or there will be different local gateway for the admin kind of traffic. So we have to have one kind of classification in the top, right?
I would say in the Kenya use case, there's no distinction between like traffic directed for the app, or I guess that's pretty much everything that the load bound or that the traffic going through any gateway would be directed to the user app. So I would probably distinguish this as, if I refer to admin traffic as I don't know if this is generalizing, like observability, like Prometheus scraping, then you wouldn't use the gateway for that.
But when you are saying a load balancer, you are doing a load balancing of kind of homogeneous kind of traffic, isn't it? Otherwise, non-homogeneous kind of traffic, if you try to load balance, then the load balancing may not be the right, isn't it?
I apologize, but I don't understand the question. Like my use cases, there's user traffic, people deploying apps. They want those apps not to be exposed to the internet, but within the cluster, you might want to do L7 load balancing, meaning using features like traffic splitting and things like that.
Okay.
And I take it, just this is a this question is not pointed, but I do take it that it's not really super great if you have to do that with multiple gateways, right?
Yeah, the reason I said there may be a specialized kind of application, some set of cluster may be serving one set of application, whereas the other set of cluster can be serving only very specialized application, even application level. So my thinking was, are we trying to group them together? Okay, this set of clusters will be doing one set of application, and is another set of cluster will be doing another set of application. In that case, when you are talking about load balancing, you have to know what kind of application your load balancing is. But if you want to reduce that complexity to one level, that's fine. All application will be a one load balancer. Then also is fine. Maybe I'm making it more complex.
Yeah, I would say this is just referring to the one level of load balancing for a bunch of applications.
In Dave's case, it's simply the difference between whether or not traffic should be allowed to come in from outside the cluster or not. There should be a way to discern that to configure that within gateway is what he's requesting. It seems really to me, Rob, you've been pretty quiet. To me, it seems pretty like a solid thing to do. I do get that it has implications potentially for, everyone else who doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, to be clear, I get the purpose. I get the idea. I think it makes sense somewhere. I'm not sure where that somewhere is. For example, let's, you can easily go down a rabbit hole of, well, hey, if you want a generic way to configure same cluster, why not have a generic way to configure same network? The traditional ILB use case as well, right? Because at some point there will be more than one way to represent that as well. And then you very quickly start to say, well, hey, right now that's represented in gateway class. Why isn't this concept represented in gateway class? Because it really feels like a class of a gateway, right? This is where a gateway is exposing traffic. So that may belong one level higher than this would currently put it. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Is this kind of an argument in favor of having some standard configuration on a gateway class? I don't know. I'm struggling with where this belongs, and I'm especially struggling with if we call this a cluster IP address, does that prevent or limit future support of a gateway, a cluster IP gateway class or something like that's kind of built into Kubernetes for cluster IP? Again, I don't know. That's pretty theoretical at this point, but I want to at least leave some room for that. And I'm not sure how this would interact yet. I know that's more questions than answers, but
There's also some questions in the chat.
I purposely, I guess for the Gamma question, I purposely made that a non-goal. This is not a lightweight service mesh, because I'm assuming that's what Gamma is for. Because there are needs and a lot of user requests to not have a mesh, which is essentially why Knative went through the whole, hey, we use Istio at the beginning, and we spent a lot of time abstracting it away to give people optionality to not use the mesh. And this is sort of like the requirement needed to get that, because like, candidly, like Istio supports assigning gateways to the ingress pod, and then they have like, you can set a gateway to be this gateway referring to the Istio resource. One that's like cluster local, handles cluster local traffic. You can do two gateways for the same deployment is what I was kind of hinting at. And like that, so that's like a way to get around this whole mesh thing. And we have ways to do this with Knative sort of like Envoy gateway precursor called Courier, which we kind of hand roll ourselves, and also like in Contour as well. We have set up in Contour to accomplish this in Knative. This sort of visibility. In terms of the mechanics that you're describing, Rob, like I don't necessarily know what the right thing is. I think like Arco has a good point that addresses are requested can be like in the gateway resource. I don't know if that means then like in terms of gateway class, it would just sort of be where you would specify, this is just like at top of my head, like IP ranges as a thing, like more, it's like a more of a templated thing, and then gateways like the stamp of the template, like instantiation of the class, maybe. I don't have the context or history on like but the reason I mentioned that is gateways is very much, there's nothing there. So that's why it might make sense to put it. Sorry, gateway class, there's nothing there.
Dave, have you I'm looking at the KEP and I'm just like, have you run into anybody else that's basically wants the same thing?
Like
that would be a good way to
visibility
get
feature.
Yeah, sure. Like basically anybody else who specifically wants cluster local gateways, who wants the ability to differentiate traffic so that like some traffic is only intra-cluster.
I would say this has been a user request from people from our open source, people
Yeah, I'm sorry.
from,
I meant other implementations. Because that's going to be one of the things that's really going to help to kind of push it, would be that, you know, this is something that more than one implementation needs. But if it is something that only one implementation needs or knows that they need, that's another way to put it, you may be the only one that knows that you need it.
well, this is what I brought up last week, right? Like one, I know Istio supports this with its cluster local gateways feature.
Okay, right. Okay, cool.
So
that's
it's
what I'm
present.
thinking.
That's been, I guess, validated. We've implemented this in Knative using other ingresses, but it's not a first party support. Like Contour implements this using 2 different installations, and we program resources against those different installations.
Okay.
But
so
like
Istio and Contour is the answer. There are one implementation that's doing this and another they're both doing it in different ways, but they need something that's effectively this.
The way to think about it, this is not like a first party feature in Contour, but it is sort of like a first party feature in Istio.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Philip, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So there are actually 2 related things that we're doing to what we just talked about. We actually, again, in the service provider area, we have a lot of what I call hairpinning, because we actually present it as external IP addresses, but they're being hit by something internal. So, you know, one service inside a namespace may call itself via our product, via our gateway. You know, we do it, we don't restrict the access to it by saying that it's only internal access, but I could see the value in that. The other thing you guys were talking about, there was some mention of sort of restricting the IP address range as a part of the gateway class. Like, again, one of the use cases we do that's really key to us is we connect to a number of network domains. So, you know, usually there's only one, like internally, maybe there's a pod network and there's a node network. Externally, though, there can be a radio access network, and operations, administration, and maintenance network, a services network, a DMZ to the internet network, and they're all separate and sort of at the gateway class is where I'm expecting you would configure which of those you can reach and how. And I think that's similar here, where you could configure, you know, that you just are listening on that internal network and not on any external network. And that would be the equivalent of having this cluster,
just to sorry, just to add some more examples. So emissary ingress and ambassador, like what I work on, also can support something like this. Usually this is done by, you create like you have like one service of type load balancer that could accept external traffic, and then another like service that it's like type cluster IP, and then you kind of bind we have like a listener resources which defines like what ports you're listening on. So you create 2 listener resources pointing to whatever ports that the services are going to be exposed on, and then that's how you can get one listener that is accepting external traffic and another one that's only really for internal traffic.
Okay, thanks for popping in with that. So there's use cases, so that's established. That's something that maybe we should kind of push up a little bit. But then there's Rob's open question, and Philip talked to it a little bit about whether or not it belongs in like gateway class. We are kind of we have kind of spent a lot of time on this, and we do have a reasonable amount of agenda. So I'm wondering if we can kind of try to wrap up into some action items to take here. Like, what can we do next to help move this forward?
I can put this on the issue itself, but I think I have two questions here. I don't doubt, and I think we've seen clearly that there are very clear use cases. The two questions that I am very interested in answering is where this belongs, specifically if it would make sense on gateway class. And then very related to that, do we want to differentiate between same network and same cluster? Or my hunch is there are going to be implementations that can support one or the other, but not both. There are going to be implementations where internal means internal to the cluster, and other implementations where internal means internal to the network. But there's probably not a lot of overlap, but just clearly stating what we actually want. And I'd like to make sure we've covered both of those with this work.
Okay, so is it as simple as the action item is those questions just need to be posted on the PR, answered on the GEP, and then we can move forward with at least merging it in an experimental, or, you know, we're still talking about this state?
That would be my preference. Yeah, just try and answer these in the GEP. Anyone can add these questions. There may be others, but those are the ones that are top of mind for me.
Sound good, Dave?
And I guess since you have thoughts on potentially it being on the gateway class, it'd be good to know, because I don't know what implications that has. If I don't know if it's simple for you to do, like, hey, if it's on the gateway class, these are the pros. If it's not on it, these are the cons.
Yeah, I can try and take the AI to explain what it would look like on gateway class. I am obviously coming from a place of bias where we already have ILB gateway classes. And so that's where we've already chosen to represent this. And by that, I mean GKE. But definitely interested in alternatives.
Roger that. So since we're coming up on the half hour then, and we have a good action item, good follow-up, I'm happy to do it, by the way, Rob. It sounded like, but go ahead. I mean, either way.
Yeah. John,
and
so sorry, I missed this from chat, but I think John asked another very important question. Is this bigger than just cluster IP, right? Like, I think John is talking about a general way of configuring in cluster anything, like how you're mapping config to services. Because I think maybe 90% of active implementations today, or some very large proportion, are taking a gateway and mapping it to a service resource. And although this is just one piece of that config, that's probably another good open question. Is this really something that we should tackle just for IP, or is this something we should tackle for everything that we're trying to map across to a service?
So I guess a question then, would we try to put in spec in gateway class to accomplish this, or would this imply customized, like, for example, like a cluster gateway resource?
I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah. Part of me, I think many of the implementations today are using gateway class for that, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably a hybrid right now.
Is that what you were implying?
We're going to add a new gateway type.
Oh, no,
I wasn't applying a new gateway type. I was just suggesting that every implementation today that is in cluster is solving the same problems, but they're doing them in different ways. Whether it's a cluster IP service or a load balancer service, it's just a small subset of the problem. There's plenty of other fields. Really, every field in service or deployment or whatever fields are being created is something that's potentially in scope. We don't necessarily need to solve the full 1,000 fields of API spec if we want to be something more specific. But there's certainly some room for standardization there. I don't think I've seen two implementations do it the same way yet.
Is
Yeah,
there some,
that's my goal.
John, would you be open to adding something to the PR to the effect of kind of getting codified what it is you're looking for? I'm happy to do it too, but like, since you have it kind of fresh in mind.
Yeah, I can comment that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And that way you just ask it and then we'll just kind of make sure that we get something about it, or at least we know that we have to follow up on it in there. I don't think I have you actually in here, so I'll just say John. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. We kind of are pushing the half hour, so I think we have enough things to follow up on. We can kind of keep this going. Let's move on to the next item in our agenda. Rob. this
Cool.
one has
Yeah,
come up
hopefully
many
one
times.
fast one. Yeah, so this has come up for a while, and I got pinged a couple times. I think Shane and I have both been asked a few times about, hey, could we have a meeting time that people in Europe could actually make it to? And it would be nice if we could actually try that out or experiment with it. But just trying to understand the potential impact of that on the attendees of today's call. If we were to consider rotating, similar to Gamma already does, and have one meeting every other week that was, 8 or 9 a.m. Pacific roundabouts, is that something that would prevent anyone on this call from attending? I know for sure we will lose at least 1 or 2 people. I'm just trying to understand the impact.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
a hand count, a hands up.
Yeah,
Just
maybe
just raise
if,
your hand if you're like, I can't make it to 8 or 9 a.m. Pacific time.
Yeah. I think if we don't see too many hands here, I think we may try just experiment with it for 1 week just to see who shows up at the earlier time. And if that works okay, then we might consider longer term. But yes, and I know this is also a very true thing, that it's much friendlier for Eastern time folks, with the exception of maybe 9 a.m. because I know lunch for many people.
Yeah, and Brazil, and there's a bunch of places and where I've seen people that would potentially want to join up that it's prohibitive.
Yeah.
So
okay,
cool.
So maybe what this looks like long term is we always have one meeting that is friendly to each kind of group of time zones, and we alternate back and forth, whether that's Gamma or this main meeting. But I think the first step would just be to experiment once. And yeah, Philip, I work with a lot of teams and have the very same problems you're describing, the way too many early calls that are already taken. So I think it will be hard to find a perfect fit. Yeah.
Okay. I'll get that updated on the SIG Network calendar then. Sound good?
Yeah, maybe not the next. Well, we can follow up on Slack, but maybe sometime end of February or something, like we can try an earlier meeting once we've given enough notice. Yeah. Okay, so my next one maybe will be a little shorter. I don't know. Is Keith on this call? It's maybe. This is a discussion point that's come up a few times, and I just kind of wanted to come back around and talk about policy attachment, its complexity, and potential ways to work around it. Keith did a great job. I think this was a follow-up from a Gamma meeting of actually trying to describe the current pain points. If anyone has others, please add them to this list. This is really just intended to be a discussion point of anything you don't love about policy attachment today would be good to understand and quantify. With that said, I have some ideas. Go ahead, Shane.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, I have some ideas. I posted them below in here. And I think they're largely representative of things that we have already been talking about as a community. One, there's this idea of building more into the API itself. So in the case of timeouts, maybe there is some, if we allow our spec to be just a little bit more vague, maybe there's some space in there for some kind of timeout configuration. I don't know. There are so many different timeouts that are configurable in Nginx. A fair number in Envoy, a fair number in HA proxy. Trying to find the intersection is surprisingly complicated, but maybe we could. Just in the timeout example.
That's kind of where I had this other comment thread with Keith, and that's kind of where we were headed also, was maybe we should come back and try timeouts again.
Yeah. So I'm very interested in that. That is far more complicated than it seems on the surface, but I would love to, if anybody has the time, I would love to see someone take that and run with it.
It needs to champion.
Yes,
we're gonna
it
do it.
absolutely does.
The other thing I was going to add real quick was just, if anybody here is using policy attachments, this might be a decent thread to come in and say, particularly if you have pain points, or even if you don't, come in and kind of add, hey, we are using policy attachment and here's how, and this is how it's painful. That would be helpful, I think, to this conversation.
I'll say for GK, we've implemented, I think, 3 different policies today. But despite them using the current model, they could probably be represented just as well as meta resources, because they're really, in at least 1 or 2 cases, they're really tied to a specific resource, and hierarchy doesn't really work for them. So that seems to go well with Nick's idea of meta resources. Yeah, that's my experience so far, but that's not as an end user either.
Yeah, we're in a not quite like that, but at Kong, what we've done is danced around policy attachment by almost doing it multiple times. So we actually had some existing resources that attached to resources to basically add additional configuration from the before time. And we are just continuing to use those at the moment, but they are not in the vein of policy attachment. They don't follow the sort of the specification laid out. And that is because we've been kind of holding on policy attachment to see how it shapes and see how people end up using it, because we've had some hesitations for these reasons as well. So.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Question in the channel from Mikhail.
Go ahead.
CRD, sorry, I'm just trying to read it. I have it on my other screen, which is tiny. Is it required to have one configuration setting per CRD? Can implementation groups group related settings together? It's not required.
No, it's not required. For GK, we've tried to group related things together. So you would have, in one example, we have a way to configure custom health checks. And so we group everything related to health checks together in one policy. In others, you have a policy that's related to, GCP specific settings for a backend. And interesting that Lewin is saying that you can attach policy to either gateway or route, but I guess that's IAM specifically.
That's correct. Yeah, we do not have a native Kubernetes experience, so you use gateway API to create the gateway and HTTP route, and then outside, then you can use the console or AWS CLI. Then you attach the IAM policy. The long-term goal is try to do everything within the cluster. But using Kubernetes language, maybe with our ACK controller to understand the policy, and then use Gateway API to attach the IAM policy to these 2 objects, so they don't have to go outside the Kubernetes to configure this.
Interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, I think this whole discussion is really just in a spot where it needs some more comments. I think that's the most natural follow-up on this one. I know we've got other things to get through, but just if you've got more thoughts, if you want to improve policy, definitely add your comments there. Don't want it to get lost.
A related comment, is the community, what are thoughts on adding an extension filter in the listener? So policies are hard because the end output after overlaying a bunch of resources is complex and hard to comprehend. Has this been discussed, adding an extension filter in the listener? So you can kind of extend it that way.
Yeah, it has. We are, at least I'll speak to my own bias, that very hesitant to recreate annotations. The problem with any kind of block like that is kind of, open-ended, is that you have recreated annotations just in a different place. And there's not really a good way to validate or really provide much of anything. With that said, it may be preferable to policy in some cases. You notice that, for example, on TLS, we have an options field, which it feels a lot like that. It's just a map string. Maybe there are some places where we could, I don't want to completely rule it out. We have to be careful that I really want to, wherever we can, push for proper solutions that really solve it the right way. And if we provide too many easy ways to kind of, everyone does their own thing, then we have ended up with ingress v2. So I don't want to say no, but I just want to say we should be careful.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Cool. So it seems like the main action item is, if this conversation has interested you, you have some thoughts, you have a use case, you have existing pain points, please do jump into that discussion and add, because that will help us to shape the future. All right, what are we at? 40 minutes after. Moving on to the next topic, which is also Rob.
Man, I added way too much to this agenda.
Go for it, Rob.
But yeah, so I was talking with Lior this morning, actually. He's been doing a lot of really great performance tests around redirects, rewrites, and the next one on his list is request mirroring. And that is more complicated than I initially thought about. And just wanted to throw it out as, anyone have ideas? So the idea with request mirroring is obviously that you're sending a request to both the main primary backend and sending a copy of that request to a mirrored backend. What do we do for conformance? The easiest thing is just ensure that the backend received the request, but then you kind of have to maybe look at logs to figure that out.
That is literally how we're doing that in Blixt. For UDP route testing, we are literally checking the logs of the server to make sure it got the datagrams.
Okay.
It could be applied to the same thing, like if you were going to send the same datagram to multiple backends. So.
Yeah, that seems like the best possible thing you can do, but even that, you're not really, well, I guess it depends.
We create a UUID for the request, and then send it to make sure we get that exact request on the backend.
And do you verify the contents of the request, or just that it is that? Okay.
Yeah, we literally pull it out of the kube logs.
Okay, that works. All right, that was easy. Yeah, I'll follow up, but yeah. And then Arco's idea of enhancing Echo Server. Yeah, we probably need some changes on Echo Server, because what it's logging today is not really sufficient for what we need. Yeah.
Roger that. Sorry, it takes me a second because I'm also taking the notes. Okay. So anything more to say on that one?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. This is quick. Bleaks, our project for a reference and testing implementation, layer 4 implementation for Gateway API, has had its first pre-release. It has a very, very basic level of UDP route support. So I just wanted to shout that out here and let people know. The next steps are going to be finally getting this license thing figured out. There's still some kind of feet dragging when it comes to the GPL v2. We're starting on the TCP. We have some of the TCP work done now. We're finishing some of that up and getting kind of TCP route implemented more completely. So that should be our next release. And after that, we expect to start using it to help define L4 conformance and getting it plugged in. So hopefully not too long, not too far away. Rob?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I am looking forward to having something we can run as a reference, especially for L4 conformance. So yeah, cool. And you've still been doing the Gateway Code Jam, right? On Fridays?
Yep. So for anybody who's interested in the project, it is a kind of, because it's a testing implementation, it's kind of a fun project. It doesn't have a whole lot of, it has weight on it, but just not, like most other things of this sort. So we do a code jam every Friday right now. That is called the Gateway API code, Gateway API code jam. We're mostly focusing on Blix for that right now. It's usually about 6 people show up, and we just do look at code. Sometimes we do live coding, and sometimes we just talk about the issues in the project and stuff like that. So if you're interested in the project, please do join in. We'd love to have you. Very laid back. We don't even record it right now because we just want people to feel really relaxed and just have fun and talk about code.
Cool. That's awesome. All right. Yeah, my next one up is I've been thinking a lot about 070 and specifically the idea of request rewrites and redirects, path redirects, making it to beta, graduating to the standard channel. And our current graduation requirements are really there's 2 forms of them. There's the alpha to beta we have implemented by several implementations, and several generally means more than 2. So has been roughly interpreted as 3. And then for beta to GA, we say we need multiple conformant implementations. So at least 2 conformant implementations. So I've been trying to work backwards from that. And as we are considering going alpha to GA at some point in the not too distant future, I've been trying to think about what that even means. So maybe if you can run back to the agenda itself, I dropped some rough thoughts in there. I am wondering if we can make it a little bit simpler and actually include the numbers. So at least 2 conformant implementations. And then maybe for the first time ever, at least count implementations that are committing to support the feature, but do not yet support the feature. One of the things that we're running into, and this is very true in this case, is that a lot of implementations are waiting to support a feature until it gets to standard channel, which you have this chicken and egg problem of we'll implement it once it gets to a spot, but we're not going to implement it while it's still experimental. I don't know if this is the best solution to that, but just the idea of, yes, we need some implementations to have past conformance for a feature, and we also need other implementations to have signed off that they will implement it and it makes sense as the current spec states. I don't know, is that a fair change? Dave,
Go ahead, Dave.
Just a quick question. Is there a reason why people don't want to implement some of the extended features like you mentioned before it lands, I guess, into the core? I might have the terms wrong, but
yeah, no,
I think the main thing is, oh, go ahead.
It's a good question. The problem with experimental features is by definition they can change or be removed at any point. So there is some risk that if you invest time implementing support for an experimental feature, it could go away or it could break.
Concern of time waste is definitely the biggest one.
Yeah.
okay.
And And there's also the risk that, you know, you release support for a feature, and then the feature changes, and then you basically have to provide your own experimental release channel for your product as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Mikhail asked a good question in chat. Said, yeah,
Yeah.
even if 2 implementations support a feature, are we sure any users actually tried it? This is a good question. No, by default, we're not like positive of that. You know, obviously, if you just implement it, doesn't mean people are going to use it, because most people, I think, will stray away from using anything in production that has the word v1 alpha on it, you know, or whatever. So, but we could ask more about that. I know at Kong we have some usage of UDP route, particularly. To your point, I think this is pretty fair. One thing I noticed today actually was I was going over, because I'm on, you know, I'm trying to champion the L4 stuff and get that into beta as soon as possible. There are 4 implementations I found, including Kong's 2 implementations of Kong, so technically 5, that currently implement, or no, sorry, 4 that currently implement UDP route, like you can use it, and 1, which is Nginx, that says it will, but isn't, from what I can tell, quite doing that yet. Which is great, by the way, for the L4 story, we have that many. But I think getting UDP route over the, we don't want it to be an alpha because people will be worried about wasting time on it hump under these terms would be better. So, and it's a very simple API right now. So I mean, that's the best thing we can do strategically is, okay, yeah, if we take this kind of an approach, we just have to be extremely, is judicious the right word? I think judicious is the right word about what actually ends up in those specs, because we're going to commit to, you know, maintaining it longer term sooner. So,
Yeah, completely agree. And there's been good conversation in chat as well. Brian's comment that no one wants to play the crystal ball gazing game of guessing which to invest in. Yeah, I get that. It's a tough problem. And others are saying, yeah, I would love to have end user usage. I wish we could find a reliable way to gauge that. I know, you know, with a lot of our open source products, it's very hard to understand who's using it for what. But if we could find a way to solve that problem, that probably is the best possible graduation criteria. Just don't know.
I am curious who among the implementations of any particular API, how many implementations today are taking telemetry of the usage of Gateway API resources. Sorry, I'm just saying that out loud, but I am curious about that, because it would be really nice to be able to put some numbers to it. Candace, you're saying OpenShift uses what specifically, just so I'm clear?
We use some of the features that are being proposed. In fact, we are proposing some of the features that we need. So we are users, not so much implementers.
Understood. And do you like this this potential change in our graduation requirements? Does it benefit you think?
My chat had more to do with when we were talking about looking for people who are actually using features that are proposed.
Okay. Any more thoughts on this one? No, yeah, we appreciate the input on that. I guess I still would ask the question though, like, so as somebody who feels like they're more on the user side of things, do you feel like alpha to GA having 2 conformant implementations, 2 implementations committed, you know, do you think this is a good change from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it is a good, from my perspective, it is good. The reason that we want to use this is because we want to be able to support many different implementations at some point.
Yeah. And maybe it can be characterized as one of the problems we've had with Gateway API is that we've been too cautious about the graduation criteria in these terms, whereas the caution needs to be just extremely focused on the specification. or rather more of the caution, like tilt the slider, more caution towards specification, less caution towards graduating something so that people can actually use it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, if there are no other comments on that, we have 7 minutes left. We can at least touch base with triage.
Anyone, I threw some issues in there. I think they're almost all copy paste from last week, but anyone feel free if you have an issue that we haven't got into or PR, just always add it to the list. Yeah.
Just since we're low on time, the one I just opened, I'm taking, it's just some test cleanup. So I'll move on to the next one since that one is assigned. Remind me of this one. I'm on it.
This one is Mattia. I think he just
Oh, yeah,
got stuck on it. I think it just needs a ping or something. I'm not sure. I wanted to just check if I missed.
Okay, I will follow up with Mattia on that one and just kind of offline or asynchronously rather, kind of get that one moving again.
Great.
Next. Add path redirects and rewrites.
I think we already covered this in the previous discussion, but I think if we make that change to graduation criteria, this one can move forward. I need to actually confirm that the implementations that support it are passing conformance.
Right. That's a trick at the moment.
Yes.
And for anybody who didn't pick up on this, I personally am trying to start up the what we're calling conformance profiles now thing, which would help to kind of get us to the point where we are reporting on these things. So we should be hopefully this year starting to do better at that. All right, so that one just kind of needs some, whatchamacallit, updates. Oh, this one I made because we had a conversation. Well, we've had a conversation about this multiple times. There's actually some prior art which is linked here. I haven't personally had the correct motivating feature, like the things in my work and stuff like that to motivate me to complete it, but we did make this issue. We know now that we have at least 4 implementations that do something like this. Static and unmanaged gateway, for those who don't know, is the idea that you could have a gateway implementation where you don't provision the gateway, or you're not responsible for the life cycle of the actual gateway resource that is posted, but instead that life cycle is managed elsewhere. In some cases that may be by hand by a human, but you still be able to use the gateway resource as kind of a reflection of what's going on with that existing gateway. Multiple implementations do this today, and there is some prior art as to like what it kind of means, but it's never been fully documented, and so this is becoming kind of a sticking point for Gamma, because there is some need among, I think it was specifically Linkerd is interested in implementing this style of gateway, but in a mesh context, and documentation needed. So I don't know what to say about this one necessarily, except that it needs somebody to grab it and kind of go with it.
I may be missing something here. What is the tie in for mesh and gateway? Usually I thought of gateway as kind of being slightly out of the gateway resource, at least, as being slightly out of scope for Gamma.
Apparently with Linkerd, and I'm probably going to be wrong here, but I'll try. Apparently with Linkerd, I know with Kuma there's a gateway API implementation that actually supports a gateway. And so I think Linkerd is just trying to do something similar where you can get ingress requests into the mesh network using Gateway API. That's my guess. And so, but they don't have, if I'm understanding the problem correctly, they don't have an operator. So unfortunately, Flynn was the person who really particularly wanted to have this kind of conversation. He's not here right now because this is at a prohibitive time of day for him. So I think the best follow-up actually would be for me to go ahead and just kind of double check with Flynn and make sure that he posts something in here stating where, like making sure we're sure about where he's actually coming from and that I'm right or wrong about what I think is the reason that he wanted this in the first place. So
Makes
which
sense.
one was that? 1687. So I will do that. Okay, moving right along. We got 2 minutes, so I'll probably be the last one here. If we even have time to go over it. Session persistence. Is this one that's like we just need to do some kind of a catch up, or does this require? I don't remember.
You know,
this one.
I'm not sure. I think it's just one that kind of got stuck and I don't know what the next steps are. I don't know if the author of this GEP is on the call.
Yep, I'm here.
Hey,
Oh,
Grant.
great. Yeah, what can we help to do to, you know, I don't know. I know this is kind of stuck. Maybe we just need more people to review it. Is that kind of the only thing we're waiting for at this point?
Yeah, I kind of had the same question. I wasn't really sure how to proceed. I think reviews would help. And I'm not sure what else. If there's something I can do, let me know. But yeah, I
Okay.
think just
Okay, and
for reviews.
And just to clarify, the current state of this is you're just defining the problem statement. You are not proposing a solution at this point, right?
Yes, I believe the last iteration of this, I'm not proposing anything. I'm really just kind of defining a common language.
Okay, great.
Cool. I added myself as a reviewer here, and I will personally get to reviewing it soon.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if you
Thanks.
can, somehow I didn't get added either, but I'll look it up myself, but, or yeah, that's perfect too.
Oh, sorry. Did you?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. All right, and we are right at time, so let's go ahead and close it up. We had one issue left. That's the first time we got to triage and we got through everything, at least enough to bump them. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Feel free to, if you had anything that came up here today, make sure that you put stuff on for next week's agenda, or you know, catch up with us in Slack. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.